Hi,
Hi.
how are you? Good, good. Well, I think we're ready. We have about 30 slides I put together. Some of them were from participants that are coming on board, and some of them are from a walk I did at Laverna not that long ago. It is 4:01. I'm going to continue to admit folks. But I want to welcome everybody who's joined us. This is a very exciting program to be able to facilitate. We have Mr. Tom Wessels, as you probably all know, joining us. You in Bar Harbor at the moment, Tom?
In Mount Desert.
In Mount Desert, there.
Oh.
Yeah, nice.
Mm.
And so when we discussed this program, we wanted to offer something online that was a little different than what we had done this summer, and make it available to people wherever they are, and try to build off what he can offer, and did offer this summer in person, but also using a lot of what he's has available in his books. But in particular, the Reading the Forested Landscape, I think, is kind of the focus here. So welcome, Tom, and welcome to all of you for joining us today. And thank you very much, everybody who submitted a photograph or two or three. It was really fun to see what people were sending in. And so I'm going to go ahead and I hope everyone can see my shared screen now. Looks like you can. And there's a photograph here. I tried to acknowledge who sent the photograph, in this case, Betsy. And if I knew where it was taken, I put that in there too. So.
Okay, so just looking at this photograph, I'm seeing a yellow birch growing out of what looks like a stone dump, where rocks were just dumped over that embankment there. And since there's a variety of sizes in them, I'm guessing we're looking at a former crop field. And we might even have a plow terrace there. I can't be sure because I'd have to see more of the slide, but there's this area that sort of looks sort of level coming over to where the yellow birch is just starting to branch. And then you get this downslope going off to the right where the rocks have been dumped. So behind that yellow birch to the left, I can see a stone mound where stone was dumped in a mound there. So again, I'm guessing probably a crop field, either that or there is a depression that some young trees are growing in. They look like pine or spruce. So there might have been something else going on here. There could have been an excavation of some sort. The rock was then pushed to the side and other material taken out. But maybe Betsy could say more about it, because that's what I'm coming up with, one of those two options.
It's a very large area. Can you hear me? Am I?
Yep, I can hear you.
It covers a large area, and it doesn't show as well in this picture because of all the leaves. But when they blow off, it's pretty impressive. And there's several other areas not too far from this with stones piled up the same way. And often the stones are very similar in size. Mm-hmm. There is a farmhouse not too far away, so I think it probably was a farmed area. But it's just so bizarre looking.
So looking at this picture a bit more closely, I'm looking at that stone pile in the back, and it looks like there are larger laid up rocks with the piled on top of it. Is that correct?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Boy, I'd really like to see this site firsthand, because we're getting now what looks like a bit of a cairn with rocks piled on it, and that could be something else entirely. There are clearance cairns where people would basically build up structures and then dump rock inside of it. But there are also native cairns that indigenous people made for various purposes. So yeah, I'd like to see that site. So maybe I'll have to do that the next time I'm down that way.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. So this is a really nice graft between two neighboring trees.
Oh my God.
Tree on the well, I mean, it depends which photo you're looking at. These are, I guess, white pines. It looks like that one limb from a white pine crossed to another white pine. They rubbed together and then grafted on. And then subsequently, something happened to the white pine whose limb comes out. It's really reduced in size at the base. I can't quite see why. And I can see a lot of what looks like sap oozing out of it. It's also blackened. So there could have been, I see some blacking at the base of the other trees too. So there could have been a fire in here. I mean, that would be my guess. It looks like there may have been a fire that actually burnt the base of that pine that's grafted. So the person that took this, Vicky, can you confirm that or not?
Hi, Tom. We don't know if there was a fire there, but it is a white pine. Yep.
Yeah. Well, one way to tell if it's a fire is to, if you're out there again, rub the areas that are black. If it comes off in your fingers, that's from fire. There are some fungi that darken trees, but generally when you rub it, it doesn't come off on your fingers.
Yeah, we couldn't find a stump there. So we couldn't decide if it was 2 trees or 1 tree.
It's definitely 2 trees that are grafted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for solving that mystery for us.
Yeah, and these above ground grafts are not that common. Root grafting underground is quite common. But to see above ground grafts, it's not that common. To see one that happened, that happened quite a while ago, is pretty impressive.
Thank you.
All right, so here we have, it looks like the remnants of a stone fence. Looks like there's a red oak on the left-hand side below it. And the ground is on the uphill side is sloping down, but it looks again pretty smooth and even on the surface. I'm not seeing irregularities from pits and mounds or pillows and cradles. So Hannah, I'm just going to ask you, if that slope comes down before it gets that stone fence, is there a little flat terrace on the uphill side of that stone fence?
Yeah, it is very smooth uphill. I can confirm that.
Yeah, and at the base where the slope's coming down, then you hit the fence. I'm just wondering, between the bottom of the slope and the fence on the side where it's smooth, is there a little flat horizontal terrace there?
Like 3 feet or less?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think there is.
Well, that's definite evidence of a former crop field. So, you can get really smooth, even ground like that on a slope from a hay field. And hay fields were plowed to level them out so the pillows and cradles wouldn't get in the way of working scythes. But crop fields that were plowed every year the soil is migrating downslope because the farmers turning the plow furrow downslope and all that soil is moving down. And eventually on the uphill side of that fence starts building up this really nice level terrace. So if you're ever out and you're seeing ground that looks smooth and even, go down slope. If you get a level terrace, that's pretty darn good evidence of a former crop field.
Well, thank you.
All right, so it looks like we have 2 maples here. I'm guessing they're probably sugar maples, and this looks like another indication of another graft. Now, this graft is happening down at the base of the 2 trees. The tree in the foreground, quite a bit younger. You can see that by its bark characteristic than the tree in the background. Again, these 2 are lying on next to a stone fence as well. That's running off between all the trees in that line there. And I think I'm seeing on this maple in the foreground possibly scarring from wire. I see 2 horizontal lines going across it. So that could be part of wire fencing that was associated. Well, matter of fact, I think I even see the wire going off on the left-hand side into the bigger tree behind it. So yeah, this is definitely wire fencing. So most likely at one time pasture, and that fence keeping livestock in or out of the pasture, which may be on one or possibly both sides of that wall. So one thing to Hannah, again, if you could tell me, I don't know, Was the ground on both sides really smooth again, or was one side sort of lumpy looking in terms of the terrain? Because the lumpy side would be the pasture side.
This is actually not very far from where the other tree was.
Oh.
The other tree was like 2 trees sort of further beyond.
Okay.
So the area sort of on the left side of the photo is that area that you were saying.
Okay.
Could have been a
So-
former crop field.
So that was definitely crop field. How about on the right-hand side? What's the ground look like there?
I'd say it's not as smooth.
It's not as smooth. Okay, so the pasture would have been on the right-hand side. Pastures, if they were just solely pastured and never opened up for any other agricultural activity, were never, the trees were just cut. They stump sprouted. That'd be the first forage of livestock. Once everything was killed, basically seeds were then sown on the bare soil and the trees were left. But that means the area was never plowed and retained its pit and mound topography from when it was previously a forest. And so only areas solely pastured retained their pit and mound topography. You know, crop fields, hay fields was all plowed away and basically removed. All right, so
Same area, by the way.
same area, okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not seeing the stone fence is a little bit more hidden, but I'm interested. The trees in the foreground are definitely forest-grown trees. They look like they might be oaks or maple. I can't quite be sure, but they definitely grew up after abandonment. And grew in an area that was shady because they're racing up to the canopy and don't have large, low limbs at all. If these were trees that were there at the time the land was open on both sides, they'd be really wide spreading limbs on both sides, stretching out into the former pasture and also stretching into the former crop field. But these trees are definitely forest grown trees, so came in after abandonment.
And Carolyn has added in the chat that she says we're told that cows were on the wire side.
Pardon? The cows.
Carolyn has added that they were told that cows were on the wire side.
Yeah, if it was barbed wire, you know, pretty much you're looking at most likely cows, could be horses, but certainly not sheep. Sheep can get caught and tangled in barbed wire fencing, so it wasn't used definitely with sheep. All right, so that's what I was just talking about. This is an open grown tree. It looks like it might be on a fence line because I see some boulders around the base, but this tree grew up when both sides were open. And so trees are very aware of where light is. And if it's open all around them, they're going to stretch big low limbs out to take advantage of that and not race up tall and straight with few limbs to the canopy like a forest grown tree. So you can see the trees in the background there are much younger. All of them, you know, forest grown, straight stems, no, you know, large, low limbs. It looks like there might be a fair amount of birch in there on the right-hand side. So yeah, that would probably be the first cohort of trees that came in then. If we're seeing, they look like they're single stemmed birch trees. They would definitely be the first cohort to move in after abandonment. So Hannah, what was the diameter of those birch trees when you took the photograph?
I don't think they were more than 4 inches.
All right. Well, that means that this was probably abandoned, you know, maybe 20 to 30 years earlier. So if we could have gone to the site 20 to 30 years ago, it would have been open land and, so abandoned probably right around, you know, the change in the 1990s to the change in the millennium, something like that. All right, so
This is from the same area as well, and that was just like showing the big tree surrounded.
Background, right? And so this tree in the foreground looks again like a maple. Is that on the same fence line, or is it?
It's all the same area. Yeah, that's the same fence line.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if that is off of the fence line, it would mean that one side was abandoned earlier. because that tree is definitely, you know, a larger tree than those 4-inch birch. So it could be that the pasture side, which is, I guess, downslope of that big open grown tree, was probably abandoned first, and then the crop field abandoned more recently. And probably at the point it was abandoned, it was no longer a crop field. It was probably a hay field. We had a lot of acreage in New England in crop production up until about the mid 1800s, and a lot of that in grain fields. And then when rail starts, you know, lacing the network of New England, it ushers in dairy farming, because dairy farmers can now, out in rural areas, can get their dairy products into urban areas pretty quickly via rail. But it also sort of puts an end to grain growing. There's a lot of grain being grown in 1700s, first half of the 1800s. But it was very laborious activity, and dairy farmers all of a sudden have, you know, the proceeds from the dairy sales and say, well, grain is now coming in on rail from Western New York State and the Ohio Valley, and they start just buying the grain and converting their crop fields to hay fields. So my guess is most likely that upslope area, when abandoned, was probably a hay field. Oh, and that's cool. So I can't tell if this is a hemlock, maybe a pine, but this limb got bent down by weight. So it could have been bent by snow or ice loading. Oh,
Sorry.
it's all right, it'll come back. And then, you know, trees are very aware of where the light is. So this probably happens a very young branch. And so one of the side twigs turned and went up vertically to go back up again. But that's a pretty cool shot, no doubt.
One thing, this is Kit.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that the picture doesn't quite show is that my arm is completely encircled by that curled branch.
I think I can see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it can do that. It can go defy gravity and then head back up.
Well, what it is, it got bent down, but you know, trees are very aware where the light is, and the light was up, so it had to turn and go back up. There was one tree that I took a photograph of in my latest book. That's a hemlock that grew up, got bent down, and then went out this way, started to turn back up, got bent again, and actually made a complete loop that was maybe, I don't know, 5 feet long down near ground level, and then eventually turned and went back up again.
So I couldn't help but add a couple others that were sort of related.
So the same sort of thing happening here. Again, weight bent down and then took off and corrected itself. But that, yeah, that's pretty darn cool.
I'm not sure if Deb is here in this group today, but she's the one who took these pictures. She's a regular in some of our programs. So.
Yeah, and these would have been young trees when this happened. I mean, they would have been like little sapling trees when this happened. They got bent like that. All right, so I'm seeing, looks like white oak leaves that may have been munched by something, and then I'm not sure the picture on the right. Looks like possibly more oak leaves, but can't say much more about it other than that. I mean, they're definitely white oak because they have rounded lobes. But is there something I'm missing, Joan, in this shot that I should be picking up?
I'm not sure Joan was able to join us. She said
Oh.
she emailed me and said she at the last minute might not be able to, so I'm not sure.
All right. Well, one thing I'll say is that oaks are a member of the beech family, the Fagaceae. It's really our oldest family of trees regionally. That family came into being about 110 million years ago. And so all the early members of that family were broad-leaved evergreens. And that's why all the members of this family, beech, oak, chestnuts, hold these dead leaves in the wintertime, which are called marcescent leaves, because they never really mastered the art of upsizing their leaves the way our more recently evolved temperate trees have learned to do. And that can be a liability because it can pick up a lot of ice and snow loading. But in any case, very classic to see oaks beech like this holding their leaves through the wintertime. All right, that looks like maybe a deer rub, or it could be moose browsing, particularly if it's on a red maple, but that doesn't look like a red maple. It looks like that might be a cherry or something. So I'm guessing, but it looks awfully high off the ground. So, I mean, that's pretty darn high off the ground. I'm guessing that the top of that rub would be maybe 4 or 5 feet. That's getting way up there for a deer. So maybe moose is the best guess here again. And they particularly like to do this with red maple. So is a person present that took the shot and can tell us if that is a red maple?
This, I'll confess, I stole from a prior program, so I'm not sure that the person who's took it is here.
Well, my guess, just because it's so high up, would be probably moose browsing bark.
Nice. Okay. And back to I think the prior picture, Carolyn asks, why do oaks keep their leaves all winter? But I think you responded to that in terms of the
evolutionary holdout. They, like I said, that family, all the members early on were broadleaved evergreens because they developed down in the equatorial tropics. So when Pangea broke up and rafted oaks and beech and chestnut into temperate regions, they never mastered the art of dropping their leaves. All right, this looks like it's a witch's broom on a conifer. It could be a pine, could be a hemlock, could be a spruce. They can occur on all conifers, but it's either that or it's a nesting area of something. But I think it's probably a witch's broom. So witch's brooms are generally fungally induced tumorous growths that take a branch and have it just sprout out all sorts of twigs in these tight bunches. But I'm guessing that's probably what that is.
And Betsy, this again was a picture. These are all pictures that people sent me in the distant, like last year.
Yeah,
Betsy might not remember this.
thank you.
Oh, wow. So there's a stone that's been pitched upright. And I think I see barbed wire coming off on the right-hand side of it. Or is that a stump of something? Because it looks like there's barbed wire coming into it. So I can't imagine it was anchored in a stone. I've never seen that, but it could be. It looks like a stone. So there's one of two things going on here. Either they somehow figured out how to anchor barbed wire to rock. I'm not seeing it wrapped around it. That would be one way to do it. Or maybe it is wrapped around, but I can't pick up on that. And that was just a way to do it instead of having a post. So Betsy, can you remember anything about this?
I don't even remember the barbed wire, but now I see it. Now that you pointed it out, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I just was curious about the way it was standing.
Yeah, well, it's intentional. I mean, it was laid like that for a purpose. And sometimes again, indigenous people had standing stones like this. And I could have been co-opted by someone to just hold that wire. I mean, it could be that the wire is just passing behind it, but it certainly looks like it's somehow related to the stone. But it'd be an interesting, I'd like to see that site too, to just check that out.
I'll go back and look at it.
Okay.
Where is this one, Betsy?
That's at Baker Forest.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. There's a question about the witch's broom, and it says, do witch's broom hurt the tree?
Well, they're mildly parasitic. They rarely do serious damage to trees. I have seen witch's brooms on high bush blueberry that can kill the blueberry bushes. So in that case, it can be a lot more serious. But generally with trees, it just occurs on one, sometimes two or more limbs, but not much more than that. So it's, it's parasitizing the tree, but it's a very mild parasite. So the tree really isn't probably that bothered by it.
Back to this question about wire, there's a question about, she says, I found some Brinkerhoff barbed wire on the Linnekin Preserve in East Booth Bay. I'd never seen it before. It looks to have been popular in Texas. Was it used in New England much? Do you happen to know?
No, I don't know. I mean, there used to be a great website. It's no longer active. It's called barbedwiremuseum.com. And they had every type of barbed wire produced in the United States on that site. And you could go and find out where it was produced and the years it was produced. It was really a gem, because if you get like these unusual forms of barbed wire that are pretty old, you could start really dating to the period to when the wire was strung. But I'm not familiar with that one well enough to know if it was commonly used around here or not.
That's interesting. All right.
All right, so this looks like, burls on a spruce tree. In this case, it looks like these burls did the tree, and they can do it when they get that heavy. If you look at the tree on the left-hand photograph, it's just covered with them. And of course, that is robbing the tree of energy that could go to normal growth. The burl is basically a tumor that is, taking huge amounts of energy out of the tree. I think these burls are viral in nature. Burls can be produced by fungi, bacteria, or viruses, but I think these spruce burls are viral, and generally these are usually pretty close to the coast. Most times I don't find them much more than a couple miles inland from the coast. So there may be something about the virus and salt presence or something that makes it really a common phenomenon as we get down into spruce forest near the coast, because I don't see it on interior spruce anytime.
Yeah, this happens to be right at one of the entrances to the Bristol Rec Trail. If you want to go look for this, by the Bristol Consolidated School, by the kiosk.
All right, so here we have some sort of a growth coming off of, this looks like it's either a fir or a spruce. And again, I'm guessing this is some sort of maybe fungal gall or something.
I confess the picture of the close-up is one I got off the internet, because I found the other image, or I took the other image, if I remember right. And so I had to go look this up, and now I don't remember much about it because it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen it before, but it definitely looks like it might be fungal, would be my guess, just by looking at the interior of the cut section there.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right, so here we have, it looks like it might be an older maple with, well, it could be, no, it looks like a maple, but it looks like it has limb whorls, which would suggest that maybe it actually isn't. Maybe it's something like a hemlock. But if that is hemlock, that's a pretty darn old tree, because that's unusual bark for a hemlock. So Debbie, if you're on this thing, can you tell me, could you identify what species of tree this was?
I don't think she's here, unfortunately.
Well, it looks like I'm seeing limb whorls, so that would mean, probably a conifer of some sort. But that is a very unusual bark, both in coloration and texture for our regional conifers. So, but that's my guess, because I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 limbs coming out pretty much all at the same height. All right, so here we have the base of a pretty old tree. I'm not quite
It
sure.
might be the same tree, actually.
Oh, it might be. Yeah, all I can say is that tree has some age to it. That bark characteristic for whatever tree it is, especially if it's a conifer, has pretty deep, fissures between the ridges and stuff. I mean, it could be an oak, but the limbs, just didn't look right. But the bark looks like it could be more oakish than. In any case, certainly an older tree, regardless of species. All right, so this looks like a member of the birch family. Maybe a hazelnut. I'm not
I think
completely.
it's a witch hazel, if I remember right.
It doesn't look like a witch hazel.
No?
They have a margin that is undulating. I think it's like a hazelnut, like maybe a beaked hazelnut or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But I can't tell much else other than that. All right, so I'm seeing some young conifers, look like possibly hemlock or spruce, in an area that's open with a number of trees that are downed in the same direction. So we could be looking at here at an impact of a blowdown. Since I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 all lined up the same way. And obviously there's been an opening in here because we have a lot of, vegetation. Maybe it's an area that's just succeeding back from some sort of disturbance because there's a lot of grassy material in there. And in the foreground, it looks like it might even be a bit wet. But that's all I can make out from this, unless the person who's here can add some other information possibly.
Yeah, I can say this is in Laverna. It is quite a wet spot.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then those trees then would have been really have superficial root systems very liable to wind throw. All right, here we have some polypore, fungi growing off of probably a hardwood tree. These are definitely decomposing fungi, so it's growing off of a dead portion of a tree, and they've been on there a while because now basically algae is growing on the fungus itself. So these sporophytes are no longer functional anymore, but certainly indicative of a tree that has either died or a section of a tree that's dead, and that's the fungus growing out of that dead wood. Well, this is, I guess these must be the egg cases of this wasp. I'm not familiar with this species. So, Sarah, you probably know more about this than
I don't know much about it. I just thought it was an interesting picture that, again, was taken in Laverna this fall, early in the fall.
Uh-huh.
And I had to go look up the species of it. It's actually is a gall, and this is the wasp that creates it. So
yeah, so I mean, that would be, they're laying their eggs obviously in the venation of that oak leaf, and then that grows the structure that the larvae is within. My guess is they're probably host specific to oak. Most of these gall producing insects are very host specific. So, but I don't know if I've even encountered, galls like that.
yeah, they're pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I saw quite a few this fall, and I haven't seen them before. So
Well, it's the sort of thing that, like, once you get once you've seen it, all of a sudden it becomes more apparent. You pick it up more.
yeah.
Well, obviously a stream coming down. It looks like there's a tree above that boulder there that was uprooted and knocked over. I think I can see the tip up of its roots in there. And I'm not sure what else I can say about this shot, unless there's something I'm missing, whoever took it, that I'm not seeing. All right, definitely a nice stone fence, made up mostly of large rocks. So this usually be a fence that would have bordered either a hayfield or a pasture. All the trees growing up are pretty much forest grown trees without a lot of big low limbs. One of them looks like it was cut. You can see that it's stumps. Actually, a couple of them look like they were cut and stump sprouted. And it looks like the ground on the right-hand side looks pretty smooth and even from what I can see, just in that little section there. The trails, there's a footpath or trail going over it. I'm not seeing any evidence of pillows and cradles. So that would suggest that maybe the side of that footpath was once a hayfield that was plowed and removed the pillows and cradles, but wasn't a crop field, because then I expect to see a lot more small rock associated with that wall. And then the far side of the wall, I can't really tell what was going on there. I can't see the superficial topography of the ground, but it was definitely, looks like on that far side was abandoned first. Just looking at the few trees I'm seeing on that side versus this side, they look quite a bit bigger. So it could be that the far side was pasture, abandoned, the hayfield kept active after it, and then abandoned.
Great. S. Woolman has 2 questions, but didn't put them in the chat yet. Do you want to just speak up wherever whatever your questions are?
I'm sorry, S. Wallman is still typing.
Well, you're welcome to just speak instead if you wish.
I have 2 questions. One is about a general question about whether or not there are geologic events that result in large piles of rocks, or I'm in Bristol, and there are areas of large rock deposits with anywhere from 4 inches up to 10 inches, in areas that are maybe as high as 4 or 5 feet high, stretching for 15 to 20 feet. It's hard to tell how deep they are because there's dirt backed up against them. That's one question. And the second question is, there's a large area on our land where the only growth is, I don't know whether to call them poplar or aspen, I get them confused, but they're probably 7 to 10 inches tall with, there's probably maybe a 1/4 acre of them in an area kind of in the middle of a woods where that's all there is. And I'm trying to figure out what the history of that area might have been. I apologize for not having sent photographs.
That's quite all right. So yes, geological activity can make rock piles. So for example, if you have a cliff area, around here, oftentimes there'll be an apron of angular boulders at the bottom. And that's what's called a talus slope. And just after the glaciers departed, we had really frequent freeze and thaw cycles, and that water would get in cracks in the cliff rock and then expand and break off pieces. So that's, an area where geologically, if you're out in the woods, you can get, a large collection of rock, but the rock will be very angular. It sounds like maybe if this section was like 15 to 20 feet long, it may be a stone dump associated with agricultural activity. And that would certainly be the case if the rocks were sort of rounded like they are in the stone fence in this photograph, because they were then tumbled in the glacier. So if you're getting, rock really accumulated like that, it's most likely due to agricultural activity. And the other site, so I'm guessing with those young 6 to 10 inch aspen sprouts, that the area is otherwise open. There's no trees standing over them. So
right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So aspen is a cloning species. So that whole area could be one individual that cloned up. And the thing would be to look around in there and see if you can find remnants of stumps. There should be stumps in there. If that was clear cut, then all of those roots would have sent up root sprouts and cloned from there.
Okay.
If there's not stumps, then that just means that the area was land that was open dirt, like again, a crop field that was abandoned, and it just happened to be a really good seed year for aspen nearby that just blew tons of seeds in there. So it's gonna be one of those two. It's either gonna be a stand of aspen that was clear cut and then root sprouted up, or it's gonna be, if there are no stumps, then it's an area that was very recently abandoned and had bare soil, because aspen seeds are very tiny and they have to land on bare soil. They can't grow on a soil that's covered with, let's say, leaf litter or anything like that. It'd have to be exposed dirt. So it's one of those two with the aspens.
I'm thinking it's probably the latter because it's surrounded by, there's some farmland on one side, but otherwise it's pine and spruce and oak, red maple, and ash, and there's no other aspen anywhere.
Okay, well, that sounds, I mean, again, and if there's no stumps, then yes, definitely that was an area that was just very recently abandoned, like a year or so ago.
Thank you.
Great. That's wonderful information. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a question that was put to us. It says, she says, curious about tall trees along the tannery line behind Liberty in Mill Stream area with huge thorns ringing the trunks at intervals up the trees. I think I remember deciding that they were Osage orange and wondered if there was a fashion in some period as natural, if they were in fashion at some period as natural animal fencing, like in the Midwest.
Oh, good question. I mean, the only other thing I can think of would be honey locusts. Those are the only two that come to mind that would have thorns like that. And I have to admit, I've never seen Osage orange up here, but I think it could be planted and maybe could take. I don't know that for sure. Honey locust was definitely sort of an ornamental tree. So I'd have to see the site to be sure. But one thing about Osage orange, there was a study done, I guess, way back. They started it in the 20s. They took different species of tree, Osage orange being one, but they took locust, cypress, chestnut, all these rot-resistant trees, and they got trees that had trunks about 6 inches in diameter and made fence posts, and then put them in the ground and monitored how long it took for them to basically rot to the point of falling over. Everything fell over. The Osage orange was the only one left after, I think, 70 years standing. And when taken out of the ground, had basically no rot on its base at all. So it's incredibly a decay resistant wood. I mean, super decay resistant.
Excellent. Okay. Just for clarification, this is a raspberry
Yeah.
bush.
And this, again, is some sort of gall formation, probably fungal, that's gotten in here and caused this sort of tumorous growth form. So I guess we're getting a lot of those today.
Someone does add, Steve Plum adds, there are 2 Osage orange in Washington Village on the left, heading up north, up the hill on 220.
Wow.
So
I'll check those out. That's really cool. I didn't know they're there.
yeah, I didn't either.
A friend of mine owns Madama Camp right in Washington, just a little bit north of the village. So
Yeah.
next time I'm over there next summer when I'm visiting, I'll go down and check those out.
All right, now we've got people going here. It says, another neat rock structure is a bunch of connected enclosure walls at a crossroad in Hibbard's Gore, which seemed a great mystery to me, thinking they were part of a tiny foundation until someone suggested it was an animal pound.
It's possible. Animal pounds are usually somewhat small, 4-sided. So it's possible it could have been an animal pound. I'd have to see it to be sure. Other thoughts are if it's next to a stream or something, it might be a millworks of some sort. If it was a house, then there would definitely be a root cellar associated with it. Barns don't have root cellars, so I'd have to see the structure to be sure. Now, in this case, we have some lichens. These are foliose lichens growing on this hardwood tree, which can't quite tell the species from the slide, but these lichens commonly grow on the trunks of trees, and they actually can benefit the trees they're growing on because lichens get the bulk of their nutrients out of the air. And as they grow on the trunk, nutrient layer is being built up, and as the lichen sloughs off or water leaches down through the lichen, some of that nutrient goes right down into the ground as sort of a liquid fertilizer. So a lot of trees when they're young have, matter of fact, all trees when they're young have smooth photosynthetic bark. But as a tree ages and the bark breaks up, like it has in this case, it becomes non-photosynthetic. And early on, trees actually have chemical inhibitors to keep lichens off them, so they don't cover the bark and thwart bark photosynthesis. But as they age, the chemistry changes to attract lichens and get the advantage of the nutrients they bring. All right, so here we have a beech growing up next to, it looks like a red oak. These trees may in fact be root grafted together. Generally trees growing within about 10 feet of each other, definitely root grafted, and happens between species. It doesn't have to happen only in the same species. So it's very possible that that beech is root grafted onto the oak right there. There's another beech in front of it. And beeches are only interior forest tree that root clones, like I mentioned with the aspen. So it may be those two beeches are actually the same individual, just growing up off of the roots of a larger, sort of colonial system of tree. All right, so here we have a down tree, and I can't tell if these two, what look like hemlocks, are growing up off that log. So Betsy, were they growing up off the log or are they growing up behind it?
They were on the log.
Okay, so this is definitely a nurse log. So this is a log that from a tree that either was blown, most likely blown down, but it may have just fallen down in old age, got covered with a nice mat of moss. And that is a really good germination site for shade tolerant small seeded trees like hemlock or yellow birch. So that was a very good germination site, and those hemlocks germinated on that tree and are now growing up off of it. So it's what's called a nurse log in this case.
Great. And just back to that other picture, well, there was a question, can deciduous and conifer trees graft roots? I presume she means conifers to deciduous, et cetera.
Yeah, and I was in Ashfield, Massachusetts a couple of years ago, and a neighboring, excuse me, hemlock and a yellow birch were toppled by a wind event, and you can see a beautiful clear root graft in the upturned root systems there. So yes, they can root graft together.
All right. Obviously, this was not this year.
What's that? No. So I'm seeing some darkening on the snow. I don't know if that's from animal tracks, possibly a denning site that's something coming out of. So I can't say much more than that, but maybe whoever took the shot can mention something about it.
There are some scat down in the lower right, maybe? Is that right?
Okay, I can see that. How big are those scat, do you know? They don't look that big. So
Small, it looks like, yeah.
either rodent or looks too small even for rough grouse scat. So could be the denning site of some sort of rodent, like possibly red squirrel, something like that. They often have middens at the base of trees, but I think I'd see cone scales on the surface if that was the case.
Back to that other image, Joan Reyes just weighed in to say there's a beech and a spruce grafted together about 10 feet up on Seal Cove Preserve, which is a really neat example. Joan, is that what the image is that you just sent me on email that I haven't pulled up yet?
No, that's not. What
Okay.
I sent you is an image of these, what look like roots growing up through a maple tree.
Nice.
It's this very strange thing that I saw last year.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's not that uncommon. So the roots could be from the maple itself, or they could be another tree nearby. So that maple has rotten wood in there that's turning into almost like compost probably. There's a tree right here on MDI I've seen. It was a big pine, fire scarred by the 1947 fire, and has all this rotten material in it. And growing about 15 feet away is a yellow birch whose roots have snaked over and now growing up in the pine tree, growing up, you can see them going up maybe 4 feet high up into the pine. And I don't know how much further they go after that. So that, you know, that can be one case, or many trees, if they have a lot of decay inside their trunk, sprout roots from that trunk wood right into it to take advantage of that nutrient resource. So it could be either the tree self-rooting into itself or another tree rooting into it.
Thank you. That's fascinating.
Joan, I'll try to pull that one up in a couple minutes because
Okay.
just a short, I think there's just one more image and then I could go into my email and pull that image up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, definitely a lot of what looks like rodent tracks, and then looks like people tracks over them, but I can't tell the species, but definitely a rodent track pattern going back and forth a lot. So there's obviously some sort of food source nearby that it's going to, and then going back to probably its denning site. But I'm not sure what the species is.
Yeah, they look a little bit melted out. All right, I'm gonna go and stop the share and pull up my email. If folks don't mind bearing with me, Joan's picture looks pretty great. So I want to pull that up for folks to look at. Let's see if I can share one more image with you all.
Oh yeah, so that tree is definitely self-rooting in there. So you can see that's coming out there. You can see some callus wood on the left-hand side. It looks like a maple, and it's just growing into its rotting material to take advantage of that nutrient resource right there. So that's a very good example of that.
It was a red maple, and that photo was probably about 6 feet up, and it continued up the tree for quite a distance.
Yeah, so a lot of trees will do this. This is, you know, not uncommon. Again, they're aware of what's going on. They're going to take advantage of a situation like that.
Great. Thank you for adding that. That's nice, Joan. Thank you all for joining. It was really a wonderful way to kind of get like a, I don't know, a little bit of a quick look at many different kinds of situations and forest uses and learn together. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. I'm getting lots of thank yous on the chat. So that was, I'll share them with you, Tom, but it's all wonderful things. And so we hope to see you out and about on the trails this winter. And we have a forest tree health program coming up next Wednesday with our district forester and state entomologist. So that not even, it'll be on our calendar if it's not already. So it'll be there in a minute. So you're welcome to join us for that. That is an in-person program here at Round Top in the David Moses Bridges Hall. So thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. And Tom, thanks again. That was just amazing.
My pleasure. All right, everyone have
Thank
a
you.
good dinner tonight. Make sure you do that.
Yes,
Good idea.
very
Bye-bye.
good.